All right, I think we're going to get started. Well, I would like to say hello to everybody. Today we have a very special guest named Brian Chen. He is a friend and also in a similar space in corporate workplace. And we thought we would do something special by doing a live fireside chat and interview, covering some of the work that he does, his background, how he thinks about the space, and otherwise taking questions from you all. So just a reminder, if you do have questions in Zoom, down at the bottom, there's a little Q&A button. Just click that button and submit anything you have. I'll keep an eye on it and we'll make sure that we answer or address any of your questions. Brian may ask me a question from time to time, in which case I apologize, but we may end up talking a little bit about what density does. I'm going to try to keep most of this discussion on Room. Brian, hi.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on. So I figured we just kind of jump right in. I'm super curious if, like, as a kid, you were growing up just obsessed with corporate real estate, fascinated by workplace optimization, or if perhaps you had spent your time doing other things.
No, I was probably just playing in the playground, definitely not thinking about corporate real estate.
What, I guess, for real though, like, what did you grow up doing? Like, where did you, what were you into? You know, were you engineering background? Like, what did you do?
As a kid, I was a reader. Honestly, I loved reading. I just devoured books, novels, nonfiction, you name it. Um, I, yeah, that was really the passion. I was good at math and good at physics and science and things like that, but I really loved the reading.
That's awesome. What was the, do you remember if there was a book that you just like read over and over again? For me, it was The Hobbit. I was like completely obsessed with The Hobbit. I think I read it 8 times when I was a little kid, and I was very
Um,
proud of that.
Banner in the Sky. Did you ever read that?
No, what is that?
About this kid who falls in love with mountaineering and is kind of the underdog, but just manages to summit a mountain as a very young kid. It's like a young adult book.
Sure, sure. It's like Hatchet. Did you ever read Hatchet?
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you consider yourself like currently the protagonist of like the startup mountain that you're climbing, or is there no real corollary? You just enjoy the book?
There's no real.
Okay, cool. What do you do now? Like, what's the name of your company? What do you do? And then I can ask you a little bit more about your backstory.
Yeah. So Room is a company where we are trying to reimagine the modern workplace. Our first product is this flat packed phone booth that ships flat to customers, assembles on site in less than an hour, and is designed to give a little bit of peace and quiet uh, to the open floor plan environment that most Americans work in today.
And Room is not your first company. You've run a company before.
Yeah, so I was a co-founder and head of operations at a company called Blue Smart, where we made smart luggage. We introduced the concept of smart luggage. Actually, it was a suitcase that had location tracking and weight sensing, connected to your phone via Bluetooth, and you could do remote locking and things like that.
How did you move from luggage into physical phone booths?
Well, having built Blue Smart from scratch and kind of moving off and moving into new environments, had definitely experienced firsthand the pain point of uh, building out an office and creating space that is truly conducive to work. And so definitely understood that pain point of um, struggling to find a place for employees to take phone calls or get focused work done. People would go crazy in the open floor plan, as is the case kind of around around America and elsewhere. Um, and a friend of mine actually that I made through Y Combinator reached out and also expressed the same pain point at his company, and he offered to seed the business. So um, Ryan Peterson, who's the founder of Flexport, and Henrik,
Mm-hmm.
founder of a company called AirHelp, these two guys were like kind of jumped right in and became our first angel investors, and we're like, this needs to exist.
How long ago was that?
That was about 2.5 years ago. Yeah, 2017.
And so normally, like whenever founders talk about like their story or the origin of the business, there's usually this like very seamless, like, I had this idea and like we ran into this problem and it was really irritating. And then it sort of like led to this other thing. And uh, was it as seamless as that, where like you're doing this thing and someone goes, look, this just needs to exist and I'd like to see this business? Or was there, I guess, like when did you first go from, I'm going to build this thing for me or for us, to no, this is something that like should exist at a much bigger scale, because that's often maybe a bit messier than I
Yeah,
think people tend to realize.
absolutely. So when I first heard about like a phone booth product that could ship flat and assemble on site, it felt like a very like a small opportunity. It felt like something that you maybe do on the side as a hobby, and you have a side business. But it was really after a few months of discovery and thinking, understanding the problem, talking to customers, where um, my co-founder and I became just really passionate about the opportunity. And it was really a few realizations. First was just the idea that there's so much passion about and hatred about the open floor plan. People complain incessantly about the open floor plan, and you know the industry that serves office workers has just evolved in a way to ignore the needs of people in offices, which felt like a crazy thing. So that was one thing that, yeah, felt like a much bigger opportunity than just a phone booth for the office. And then the other thing that we realized was a phone booth. What it really does, the alternative is construction, where you're talking to a landlord, you're asking for a building permit, you're hiring a general contractor, rerouting HVAC, rerouting sprinklers and all electrical, and it's just so expensive and disruptive that it's basically impractical. And it felt like this was actually a new way of building out an office. And so that's kind of evolved into our vision, which is to replace construction, replace the need for expensive tenant improvements in building out office space. So uh,
Well,
it was
so when you sorry to interrupt, but like so when you talk about value proposition, is that predominantly around this sort of like cost savings in construction? I guess how do you position, because you have a very aggressive price point. You One of your founders or someone on your team told me, uh, room is for everybody. We're democratizing room. We're democratizing space.
yeah.
Which I think like uh, you have to have big ambition when you're a venture backed company, but like I guess like one, how do you think about value proposition? Is it specifically around construction? And then two, like what is this concept of room is for everybody?
Yeah. Um, so the concept of room for everyone, we were not the first company to ever introduce a phone booth, but when we looked at the existing marketplace, the products were priced at a price point where no company could afford to buy as many phone booths as the world needs. And it turns out that the world needs a lot of phone booths because people need places to do video conferencing and take phone calls and all of that. So we started with this idea that we need to price our product in such a way that it can actually be used to solve the problems of noise and lack of privacy at scale. So we had this idea of scale in mind when we determined the price point. In terms of value proposition, though, the idea that our product replaces construction is maybe like it's not the most immediate value proposition that resonates with people. The problem that resonates is when you're in the hallway or in the stairwell trying to do an important phone call, and whether it's closing a deal or calling a dentist, that is the pain point that really resonates and that everybody feels. Or in the case study that we did together, people wander hallways looking for conference rooms, and conference rooms are constantly being used.
So you said the world needs a lot of phone booths. Do you know how many, by any chance?
Millions. So
Millions. Okay.
the way that, and this is constantly evolving, right? But um, the way we think about the number of phone booths people need in an office space is based on the data that we have and the measurements we've done in different office spaces. It's about 8 to 10 employees per phone booth, where you need that. Like that's the right ratio for people to be able to have enough availability to make phone calls. And I expect that number to go down over time as remote work accelerates,
Hmm.
as video conferencing continues to accelerate, and we're basically working from our phones and laptops.
So, can you give me an example, maybe an at scale customer? We've got people who are here today who are from, major organizations with thousands of employees. Does that 8 to 10 to 1 ratio hold up? Like, it doesn't have to be a specific name, but can you give me a specific example of the type of this is what it looks like at scale, and then here's like the benefit.
Yeah.
You end up using, you have more space, fewer conference rooms are sort of overbooked. Like, what is sort of the outcome as a result post deployment?
Yeah. Well, it's a really timely question because we just profiled one of our customers called Braze, and they are a marketing technology company. They have about 400 or 500 employees, and they started off with buying 1 or 2 phone booths, as most of our customers do, and they saw immediately how much it was being used. That's the best evidence of that we are solving a problem. You walk into an office with a couple of phone booths and you see that they're used all day long. Um, but they started off with just a handful, and then they have over time uh, purchased about 70 phone booths for a company of 400 or 500 employees. So they've truly embraced it, and as they've moved into new offices, what they've done is, instead of thinking about construction and thinking about building in phone booths with drywall and whatnot, they've decided to use our product as the default option. And that's a great example of a company that has embraced that ratio and really thrived as a result.
So we're talking a lot about the product, like the concept of a phone booth. Like, it's, no offense, but it's kind of a boring concept, right? Like, it's like you've got these four walls, two of them perhaps are glass. You're sitting in one right now,
Right.
but like, clearly people get very excited about the product. Um, what are they getting excited about? Are they, is it derived productivity? Is it, just happier employees? Is it like, how do they sort of internally measure whatever the return is? And I don't mean this as a sales pitch for Room. I'm just genuinely personally curious, like, why
Yeah.
get excited about a phone booth?
Well,
If you're not if you're not the builder of phone booths, which I can totally appreciate.
yeah, it's a few things actually. I mean, focus is something that is truly precious, right? The studies show that it takes 25 minutes to return to a state of focus if you are distracted. So need, if you find a need for focused work and you have a place that you can retreat to that's in close proximity to your office, and you can truly hunker down and get focused work done, that is incredibly relieving, right? So that's one thing, the ability to do focus work. The other thing is um, when I mean, honestly, the anxiety that comes with searching for a private place to take a phone call, especially if it is an important phone call. I mean, you see people on Twitter talking about how the modern uh, office is like the bathroom, because that's where you can take, that's the only place you can find to take a phone call, right? So um, those are, some of the most compelling reasons people get excited about it.
So we have a question about soundproofing. I guess two things. We were actually just talking about this before we jumped in, but I'm wearing headphones and you're not. Can you tell me why that is? And then number two, can you talk about like how you think about noise and whether or not they truly are soundproof? And what is like what's sort of the real experience as opposed to the obviously I think every phone booth strives to be perfectly soundproof, but what's sort of the reality inside of an actual work environment?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer the headphone question first. This was actually one of the kind of more surprising insights that we found after seeing people use our phone booth. But the internal acoustics of the phone booth are really designed and optimized for what we're doing right now, which is a video conference setup. And so am more comfortable just having the sound and the audio and the microphone coming from my laptop as opposed to putting on headphones, and it's acoustically designed for that. So that's why I'm not wearing headphones. Um, when it comes to soundproofing, people tend to underestimate what it takes to have a great phone booth experience, and the key thing that people don't realize is that there's a massive trade-off uh, between soundproofing and ventilation.
Mm.
And so if you didn't have a door, for example, then you would have maybe a private space, but there would be no sound barrier, and you would be able to hear everything, and it would be very well ventilated. The moment you put that door on in such a way that it seals, then you have an issue with ventilation. So we had to iterate and be very thoughtful about how we navigate that trade-off between soundproofing and ventilation. And what we ended up settling on is designing what are called sound traps into our phone booth. So sound traps are channels where air can escape, but sound bounces along that channel and gets deadened so that the air escapes but not sound. So that's one of the key things that it is four walls, but to get that right takes a lot of testing, a lot of iteration. It's one of the things that I think our product excels at.
Have you ever heard of a Tesla valve?
No, I haven't.
It's a really cool mechanical system where essentially it's like designed by Tesla, but it allows for gas to travel expeditiously in one direction, but very, very poorly in the other direction, so that you don't end up causing like a fire or like mixture or whatever else. It's cool that you essentially have designed, it sounds like something very similar where you're trapping sound.
Yeah.
One of the questions, and I think this goes back to the ROI item, is you touched on the value of your product in terms of the ability to focus, find privacy, et cetera. How do you quantify or measure these items to prove value add? Is there a way to measure the return on experience or investment? And maybe just to add to this, it sounds like if you were to arm someone internally to make the case to their team as to why they should invest, what's the simple math that you do for them?
Yeah. Well, first, comparing to construction, to go through those steps of actually building out a phone booth with the general contractor. All of our customers, even customers whose job it is to build offices out at scale, estimate about $15,000 to $20,000 just to build a phone booth that is acoustically treated and is well ventilated and all of those things. So there's an immediate savings when it comes to replacing construction. And then the other way we kind of talk about ROI is when real estate utilization, right? So you're obviously very familiar with this, but we partnered with a company called Density.
Unlike you, I grew up as a 6 and 7-year-old thinking about real estate utilization inside corporate America. So
Yeah. But we installed density sensors in one of our customers' offices, Compass, and we looked at how conference rooms were being utilized, and we found that 70% of meetings in conference rooms were between 4 people and less, and about a third of all meetings was just one person in those conference rooms. Basically, it's I think we're all familiar with of seeing this. So one person will camp out in a conference room, take a phone call, and then the other people are left with no place to meet. So there's a real savings when it comes to real estate utilization.
So it's interesting. There's a company, it sounds like Measurement, and this is not intended to be self-promoting, but that measurement of use is helpful in understanding or deriving some type of math on return. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we actually, there's a recent thing that we saw with a company that everyone who's on this call or this webinar would recognize. 92% of working hours, all conference rooms are in use. 83% of the time, it was no greater than 2 people. And 50% of the time, it was no greater than 1. And they had designed, their architects had them design these spaces to support 8 people, all the conference rooms. In this particular building that we were in. And we're not talking like 5 conference rooms. We're talking like, 3 figures. Like it's just amazing. And so it seems like that's kind of like maybe the symptom of the problem that you end up solving. I don't imagine you're going to squeeze a second person into your current phone booth.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is very much informing. So this data is very much informing our product roadmap. But measurement is a key part of like the office of the future, right? And I think what we're trying to do is move from a world where the office is something that's fixed at one point in time and something that you just live with for the next 10 years of your lease term. What we're trying to do is make the office something that can be iterated upon, that can be optimized, because I think the mistake that most people make is they design a space and they think that they know how humans are going to behave in that space, but invariably humans will surprise you, and the way that they work is going to surprise you.
People are weird, man. People are weird.
People are weird. So the vision that we're trying to build to execute against is this iterative, adaptive office environment, and to do that you require the modular build and modular products that we have, but you also need to have the data and the insights. So it's really a combination of those things where you're able to close the loop when you hear feedback from your employees and react.
So to just close on the value portion, and also just as a quick time check, we've got about another 5 or 6 minutes or thereabouts. We'll kind of run and close as it makes sense. If you have questions, please submit them, and I'll make sure that we cover them sort of in the remaining time. But can you situate price for us? Like you were like, yeah, it's really expensive to buy phone booths in the market, and then we've talked a lot about value and sort of democratizing room. But can you give us some actual hard numbers? What is expensive? What is room cost?
Our product is priced at $38.95 with free shipping included and a 100-day risk-free trial.
Nice pitch. Nice pitch.
Yeah, we designed, we kind of settled on this pricing because we did want to make it accessible to as many people and companies as possible, and we are very transparent. The offer feels a little bit consumer-like because we believe that individuals are at the end of the day driving these decisions, and consumerization of enterprise is something that people talk a lot about. But people expect that level of transparency. They want the purchase experience to be as similar when they're buying something for the office as when they're buying something for the home, right?
What's your return rate?
Great question. So we have over 10,000 phone booths that have been installed and deployed across the US and Europe. And we have received maybe a couple dozen returns. So
the free trial is well worth.
Yeah, people.
Like if you're on the fence, like get the thing, because you can always return it, but you're likely not going to return it.
Exactly. Now, when it comes to other alternatives, for the most part, there's a lot less transparency around pricing. You oftentimes are asked to buy through a dealer. You have to negotiate, exchange emails and PDFs with price quotes, and it's a cumbersome process. So other products cost anywhere from $8,000 to $12,000 if you're buying from like a Herman Miller dealership.
Sure. So a couple other questions. How to measure ROI of corporate real estate? That seems like a really big question. I don't know that you can answer that question by yourself. I would say that feels like a really big one. How to quantify the challenges of open offices? This is an interesting one. Maybe this will be a choose your own adventure. How to use occupancy data to design effective and scalable offices. Yeah, that one's definitely probably in our court. And then, do you have any? Oh, this is a good one. Do you have any plans to expand into larger rooms? What is the future of room? Let's pause on the future because I feel like it's a really good place to close.
Yeah.
And let's do some. What is the ROI of corporate real estate? Like, you're building these things, you know that like remote work is coming. You're sort of investing in video conferencing as like a bet. Do people still need offices? Do they just need phone booths and a bunch of open spaces? Is activity-based working the thing? Like, what is your theory on corporate real estate?
Yeah. The theory that the thesis that we have is that because you can work from anywhere today and you're enabled by this set of technology and tools that enable you to work from anywhere, the office needs to be conceived as one part of a network of spaces in which you work from. And so if you're trying to measure ROI on the investment you make in your office, the real question is, do people even go to your office? Do they enjoy
Yes.
the work environment enough that they want to go there? Right.
Can I add a stat on that one?
Yeah.
So we have a customer, also one that everyone would probably recognize, super large multinational. They have 2,000 across just one building, one of like an enormous portfolio, tens of millions of square feet of space. In one building, they have 2,399 available seats.
Mm-hmm.
Over the course of the last 180 days, their peak utilization, so the peak busyness, or those seats that were used, was 43%.
Mm-hmm.
That's the absolute busiest. If you confine the time to the hours of 11 a.m. and 2:15 p.m., which is when most people show up, and you eliminate Fridays, the peak is 49% utilized. And the average is less than a third. It's like 29%, 30%. The average utilization is like 29, 30%.
Yeah.
That customer is spending $839,000 a month on desks that have nobody in it. And
Yeah.
so I think maybe this goes to the question. The question, this is one building. This is like super small. This is a company that has, hundreds of thousands of employees. This is just 2,399 seats. So maybe this just goes to the question about like how to think about occupancy data and ROI. I'm sorry I totally interrupted you, but I want to make sure we get through a couple more things.
Yeah.
All right. So you snap your fingers and the future exists the way that you hope it exists. Everyone has rooms, or you have millions of rooms that have been created. Like, what does that look like? What like happens next? And what will room remain a phone booth, or will it look very different, some 5-10 years from now?
Yeah. So what happens is you walk into when you're looking for your next office, you walk into what is essentially a white box. And instead of waiting 6 months for the process of demolition and tenant improvements and negotiating that piece with your landlords and whatnot, you have a set of room products that are able to basically pop up in your office overnight and be optimized specifically to the needs of your company. And when paired with tools like density or data and analytics in the workplace, then you have a space that can be continually optimized as your team changes and as your needs change. That is really the future, and it's not just about one person phone booths, but it's about the entire space in which your employees work.
There's a good question that I think, people talk a lot about, like, we're going to be able to A/B test physical space, and I think I'm even on a podcast that says something like that. Like, we're going to be able to A/B test physical space. And like, I'm curious if that's bunk. Like, I'm really curious if like people are actually going to move phone booths, the modularity and the movability and the fact that it's self-installable and all that other stuff. It's like great on like getting you up and running, but once it's there, Like, aren't these things mostly collecting dust? Being used. So that's probably the wrong euphemism. Being used regularly, but like, are people really rolling these things around, like deconstructing them, taking them to the next office? Like, is it really the modular future that we believe, or is that just a marketing pitch?
No, it is. We get asked every single day for help moving phone booths, and we offer that as a service. So people do move it, and the A/B testing. It's not just about location and placement; it's about quantity, right?
Mm.
So the 100-day risk-free trial is an A/B test. It is okay. Let's put this uh, phone booth in. Let's see if it's being used, and if it works, let's add more, right? So even just the addition of phone booths is evidence of this kind of like just productization of the office and uh, digitization of the office.
So we're over the 10:30 mark. I'm just going to keep rolling, Brian, if you don't have a hard stop that you have to like race off to. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, cool. As you all sort of decide, those who are like in the webinar, if you decide like you got to head out, obviously, just leave. You don't need my permission to stay or leave, but don't hesitate to drop out. Okay, so then it's a one-time A/B test. It's like a one-time. Do I need this thing? And then like, how's the resale value? How's the, how? Sorry, go ahead.
It's continuous because you do it once and then you add and you see how it's being used, and then you have the opportunity to do it again. But that's what's so different about the modular vision versus the fixed version, because I'm sure you have clients where the data shows they need more one person private spaces, but the next opportunity in their minds, the next
The next building.
is the next building.
Mm,
And that's
interesting.
not like, yeah, then in that world, A/B testing is total bunk, right?
So then the value, okay, so then the real value is like, you can start solving this problem now. You can stop working on the, you know, like real estate is like, the timelines of real estate are ludicrous or very slow. Like you can start making changes now, very iterative changes now, and perhaps making much better decisions about how you might design future space based on
Yeah.
how space is used. Um, do I get a 100-day free trial? Like, man, there's a lot to talk about with phone booths. Do I get a 100-day free trial for every unit I buy?
For the first unit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Clever. Okay. All right. This is a good one. Why do you think people should be still coming to the office or getting together in physical space when we eventually will have virtual space that is indistinguishable from reality? This is a long-term, I mean, obviously like the resolution on some of these things is going to take some time, but curious.
People, since the beginning of the internet, people have predicted that that virtual work will be like the end all be all.
Yeah.
And what we've witnessed since the internet really kind of, since the 90s, is just continued densification in cities and continued migration of people to urban areas. And the reason for that is cities are fun, cities are dynamic, get great food. There are, different options for entertainment. And that same logic applies to the office, right? People at the end of the day, they crave, a certain number of people will crave that the dynamism that comes from being in close proximity to your coworkers. And so, that's why offices are not going away anytime soon. They need to evolve. They need to be more attractive places for people to hang out and to get work done. But I really don't believe that we're entering a world where people are just on their laptops and it's going to be a totally virtual office. There are examples, very interesting companies that have embraced 100% distributed workforce,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think that's anything that I don't think that will become the norm by any means.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, just sort of like the amount of space that is wasted is pretty colossal. I think like you're talking about adding more space in dense dense organizations. But like the reality is that a lot of these organizations have too much space and too few people. So I would imagine like it's great to tackle the fast growing organization, especially like tech companies who are adding headcount, like crazy headcount every Monday. I heard some ridiculous stat about an organization that's acquiring 50,000 square feet of space every Monday for the next 5 years, and they're going to spend $14 billion on space over that period of time. I think that for that type of organization, it seems to make sense to have some type of mechanism where like you can further segment space inside of busy spaces to too many people in too few square feet. But for organizations that are really large, like they just kind of have all the space. They've got way too much space. So like seems like room or something like that is not necessarily a viable opportunity for that. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I don't think so. So the motif for us when we design our products is that our products are purpose built. They're intentional for the use case, and as a result of that, they're preferable to built-in solutions. So, take video conferencing for example. I am much more comfortable having this video conferencing call with you in this room phone booth than I would be in a conference room. So even if the conference room were available and there was all the space in the world, I would do this. We see people actually, at night, people who are in the office at 7 or 8 p.m., they still are in the phone booths, even though there's no space constraint. It just is a more intentional experience. So I think that is like that lens of saying, this is not just about space. This is about intention within space. Then our room products outperform anything that could be that is just built in.
Yeah. So we are going to wrap very soon because we're about 10 minutes over. But there's another really good question. I'm pretty sure most phone booth companies don't adhere to certain local fire and accessibility. I mean, especially like you can't wheel a wheelchair into at least current iterations of phone booths that I've seen. So does this depend on country? It's a really good question. Just sort of like, how do you think about fire and accessibility?
Yeah. There are a lot of things to be considering when you buy a phone booth, right? Fire code is definitely one of them. For structures that are less than 4 feet by 4 feet, you don't actually need to have sprinkler access. That's according to the building code across the U.S. So fire code is something that you don't necessarily need to think about. You do need to think about the compliance of your electrical components. Our product is UL listed, so it is certified according to all of the industry standards. I'm sure you guys have had to do the same thing with your density sensors as well, but not all phone booths have that. Our product has also been tested according to something called Green Guard, which tests the level of VOC emissions. I don't know if you remember seeing this, but WeWork had been using some phone booths that had high formaldehyde emissions because they didn't go through that testing. And our product is tested to the highest and most stringent standard when it comes to VOC emissions. So that's definitely something as well. When it comes to ADA, essentially a floor plan, single products are not ADA compliant. It's really a floor plan that needs to facilitate equivalent access. So our recommendation is always, if you have a phone booth, because our phone booth is not going to, the single person phone booth is not designed for wheelchair access in mind. But if you have our product, then you need to provide that equivalent access in the form of a larger room, right? And our future products will be designed with the ADA compliance in mind.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, Brian, as always, you are excellent, and I really appreciate the time. Any closing thoughts before we wrap?
100-day risk-free trial. There's very little reason to not do it.
Yeah. And I think generally speaking, it's interesting to see I think you mentioned this before, but the consumerization of the enterprise. There's like lots of interesting products that exist today that are far more mature. Setting aside room altogether and just sort of thinking more broadly about products inside corporate, it's exciting to see people trying to tackle what I think is like a massive set of problems in space utilization, space design, and otherwise, more
Yeah,
sustainable methods.
I think so people, one thing that I'll just close on is people think that we're called room because our phone booth, our product is a room essentially. But the truth is that we're called room because our mission is to make room for people in the office. And in line with that consumerization of enterprise, in line with the things that you're working on as well, our sincere hope is that the outcome is that people live and work better, in the places where they spend up to a third of their lives, which is the office.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hopefully that will become true.
That's great. Well, I think we'll wrap there. If you have additional questions, I think Brian's really easy to reach, certainly on Twitter. Really appreciate everyone's attention and time. I hope you have an excellent day wherever you may be. And Brian, thank you again for the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
See ya.
Yeah.